Every day, the news brings more and more images of random violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms. Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Ronnie Ersenbach, and this is the Band Media Podcast, where we will be talking about the art that crossed that line. All right, this week on the show, we're going to be talking about Jesus Christ. Now, before you get too excited or set, depending, the Jesus Christ we're going to be talking about is Jesus Christ Allin, or better known as GG Allin. He might, in fact, be the only person we feature on this podcast with a stage name less offensive than his given name. Fun fact, Lemmy Kilmister from the band Motorhead also used a different name than he was born with. But his real name was Ian Fraser Kilmister. I just always loved that Kilmister was the real part and Lemmy was the made-up part. Some people say Kilmister, and that's because those people are cowards. GG actually got the name GG because his older brother, who was just a baby at the time, when they first brought GG home, they said, "This is your little brother Jesus." And he said, "GG?" And the name just kind of stuck. But all the name stuff aside, GG Allin was a rock and roller, playing in various bands, mostly punk rock, but also a little bit of country and some spoken word during his career, which lasted from about 1973 until his death in 1993. Now, it may seem like a little bit of a spoiler that I tell you guys he died before I really tell you who he was and what he did, but really the surprising part of the story is going to be how he ever lived to be 36 in the first place. To call his music transgressive would be a bit of an understatement. He did a brief stint drumming for bands like Malpractice and Strip Search before moving on to frontman status, forming different backup bands with such colorful names as the Jabbers, the Scumfucks, the Texas Nazis, the Cedar Street Sluts, the Holy Men, the AIDS Brigade, the Southern Baptists, Carolina Shitkickers, and probably most famously, the Murder Junkies. And keep in mind, each one of these bands always was preceded with GG Allin and he released dozens of albums, EPs, and singles. Before I go on listing some of the titles of the albums and songs that he did, this might be a good time for this week's trigger warnings. We will be touching on topics that include homophobia, misogyny, racism, violence, rape, unconsensual acts, bodily fluids, pedophilia, and suicide. I know this week is a doozy, but I think we can get through it together. Unless, of course, you don't feel like it, like for any reason. Then we'll just catch you next episode. There's no shame in skipping an episode from time to time. All right, so let's hop back to some of his discography. Keep in mind, this is by no means an extensive list. More of a now that's what I call music compilation of his most offensive titles. We've got the album Dirty Love Songs with the songs Eat My Diarrhea, Hated in the Nation, including the songs Bite Me You Scum, Needle Up My Cock, and 10-Year-Old Fuck. The album Freaks, Faggots, Drunks, and Junkies, and believe me, I didn't like saying it as much as you didn't like hearing it, with the tracks Suck My Ass, It Smells, Dog Shit, and Cunt Sucking Cannibal. Another album was The Sleaziest and Loosest Sluts, with the tracks Blood for You and I Wanna Suck Your Cunt, and his 7-inch with the AIDS Brigade, Expose Yourself to Kids. Like, I mean, the list is endless, but I think you folks get the idea. And the longer I go on, the more I just feel like I'm Wally George. Wally George, for those of you who don't remember or never knew, was this crazy conservative talk show host that had his own public access show here in Southern California called Hot Seat, which ran from 1983 until his death in 2003. Fun fact, he's actually the father of Rebecca De Mornay. But back to GG. His lyrics often dealt with, or more arguably featured, most of the things mentioned in the trigger warnings. The use of the word faggot, the N-word, blackies, KKK, bitch, cancer, AIDS. And that's all literally from just one song called Die When You Die. And this dude had a catalog of music. But believe it or not, his music isn't what lands him on the episode this week. I mean, it would have been enough, but there's more. What lands him on our show this week was his live show. I often think of him as kind of the real-life shock rocker boogeyman. Marilyn Manson, Ozzy Osbourne, Allison Cooper, and all of these urban legends started to flow about them at the time that were always, even if they had a little bit of truth behind them, you found out were overblown by the media. Well, GG Allin, for better or worse, was the real deal. One of the more infamous acts that he would partake in his live show was defecation. He would shit on the stage, he would shit in the audience, he would often eat it or grab it and rub it on his body, and of course, throw it into the audience at audience members. He often performed in the nude or with his trademark jockstrap. He also incorporated bizarre sexual acts into his set, such as shoving bananas up his own ass, and even making the claim that he raped both men and women on stage. He would routinely bash his own face in with his microphone and cut himself on stage. Again, practicing the sharing is caring model, he would also beat audience members and grab their hair and pull them face first into his genitalia. Important not to forget, covered in his own blood and shit while he did this. It's been said that a GG Allin show never lasted for more than 20 minutes. It was always being shut down by the club owners or by the cops. Merle Allin, who was GG Allin's older brother and bass player, also added hospitalization to the list, as the crowd would often turn on GG, giving him a beating as well. Shows also had a tendency to burst out of the clubs and into near riots on the streets. Sometimes because of the revved up, violent nature of the shows, but a lot of times it was simply patrons trying to escape the smell of human excrement, which I've heard from accounts was worse than anything you've ever smelled. So you may start asking yourself, what are the ingredients that led to the making of this very fucked up cake? GG was born in Groverton, New Hampshire in 1956 to Merle Allin Sr. and Arleta Allin, and lived in a log cabin, a real-life, no-shit log cabin with no running water or electricity. GG's dad was, by all accounts, a mentally unstable religious zealot, with tendencies towards violence to boot. He kept his family intentionally isolated in their log cabin, and also they were very poor because, according to Arleta, Merle refused to work, but always had to have a new truck. Merle Sr. was the one who gave GG the name Jesus Christ Allin, because he believed he was visited by Jesus, who told him that his son would be a great man in the vein of the Messiah. His violence worsened over the years. At one point, Merle Sr. started to dig a hole that was like 10 feet deep in their cellar. When Arleta asked what the hole was for, he said, "I'm going to bury you and Merle and GG down there." Arleta tried to escape with the kids, but Merle Sr. held the family at gunpoint. He would also rape Arleta that weekend. But as she says, talking about her kids, quote, "I didn't say much because I didn't want them to know what was going on," end quote. She would eventually escape by taking the boys and hitchhiking down to her mother's house. Merle Sr. did come at one point and take GG back, but Arleta spoke to a judge and was able to get sole custody back because who in their right mind would let that man have custody? Merle Sr. mostly disappeared after that. Arleta said that she called him first after she found out GG had died, but he didn't show up to the funeral. Before enrolling GG in school, Arleta had his name changed legally to Kevin Michael Allin in hopes to give him some kind of normalcy in his new life. Unfortunately, it didn't seem to work. He did poorly in school, even though by some accounts he was a very bright kid. His older brother Merle started to get into music, picking up the guitar. GG followed suit, learning to play the drums. When Merle started using drugs and drinking, GG also followed in his footsteps. GG began to be bullied by his peers, especially after he started cross-dressing in his early years of high school, which was inspired by the proto-punk band the New York Dolls. Fun fact, the lead singer of the New York Dolls, David Johansen, would later adopt the pseudonym Buster Poindexter and have a hit with the song Hot, 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 and occasionally does some acting. Most memorably for most would probably be the Ghost of Christmas Past in Scrooged, but I always remember him from Let It Ride. As GG's music career began to take off and he started doing those shows I described at the top of the show, he was arrested numerous times, mostly for assault and battery or indecent exposure. During this time, He also got married to one Sandra Farrow from 1978 to 1985. There's not really much information on that marriage. He would go on to have a relationship with a teenage girl from Garland, Texas, who he got pregnant. His daughter Nico was born in 1986. GG Allin pretty much abandoned her and her mother, and Nico chose to distance herself from the family. Continuing his penchant for underage girls, at the time of his death, his girlfriend was Liz Mankowski, who was 17 when they met. He would also make the claim that at, quote, 35 years old, I can sleep with 16, 12, 13-year-old girls and boys and animals. Hey, this is the life. I got it all. End quote. However, his criminal acts did catch up with him in 1989 when he was charged with assault and attempt to do great bodily harm less than murder. GG admitted to cutting a woman, burning her, and drinking her blood, but would insist that it was consensual and that she did the same to him. Allin ended up accepting a plea bargain and serving time from Christmas Day, 1989, to March 26, 1991. During this stint in prison, he would write the GG Allin Manifesto. At less than 1,000 words, it sounds more impressive than it actually was, but it made it very clear that he was ready to continue his quote-unquote mission of an underground rock and roll revolution, and that it would be violent. 1989 was also the year that he made the claim that he would kill himself on stage on October 31st, Halloween, and that he would be taking his audience with him. But when the big day finally came around, he was in jail. He would continue to make this claim year after year that he would take his own life on Halloween, but always ended up being imprisoned on that day. While in prison, GG was contacted by a filmmaker who wanted to make a documentary about him. GG agreed, and that film would be called Hated, GG Allin and the Murder Junkies. And it was directed by a young Todd Phillips, who would of course go on to a prolific directing career, including The Hangover and most recently Joker. Fun fact, Todd had partially bankrolled the film by contacting serial killer and rapist John Wayne Gacy in prison and asking him to paint portraits of GG that Phillips could sell to raise money for the film. Gacy agreed because GG had befriended Gacy and had been to visit him in prison many times. As soon as GG was released from prison, they started filming the documentary. He, in fact, skipped out on his parole so that they could do the tour. By now, GG was starting to gain bigger media attention, going on shows like Geraldo, Jerry Springer, and The Jane Whitney Show. GG played his last show on June 27th, 1993. The show ended with him and his fans again taking to the streets. GG completely naked and covered in his own blood and excrement. Sometime in the hour of stumbling around New York, he managed to put shorts on. He eventually ended up at the apartment of his friend Johnny Puke, where the party continued. GG did a large amount of heroin and overdosed. No one noticed he was dead until the next morning. GG Allin's funeral was basically a small party. His body was left unpreserved, and his friends and his brother blasted loud music and posed for pictures with his bloated and discolored corpse. They added drugs and a bottle of Jim Beam with him in his casket. He was wearing nothing but his black leather jacket and his jockstrap. Before they buried him, Merle placed a pair of headphones on him, which was plugged into a Walkman, playing a copy of GG's The Suicide Sessions. The video for the funeral is kicking around online, and you notice something very strange as you watch through it. I mean, stranger than the whole affair in general. In the midst of all the craziness, there's this one older woman in a nice black dress greeting, talking to, and even giving hugs to some of her fellow parishioners. It was GG Allin's mom, Arleta. Amongst all these punks and weirdos, you can kind of make out a young man with no pants saying something along the lines of, "It was nice of her to let them all in." She simply replied with a warm smile, "Well, they were Kevin's friends, they're my friends." And adding, "Would Kevin want me to be any different?" You know, it's funny, throughout my research, she was the only person who regularly referred to GG Allin as Kevin. Underneath all the ugliness that is GG Allin's story is the story of Arleta Gunther, a woman who survived not only her insane husband, but in a lot of ways, survived her son as well and managed to love him with all of her heart. There's a great documentary out, and it's called GG Allin, All in the Family. It catches up with Arleta and Merle Jr. after all these years, and in it, she said that she hated Gigi, but she loved Kevin. She even reads a letter that he wrote her from prison, talking about how often he thinks about hanging out at the pool with them when they were younger. And maybe when he gets out, him and her and Merle and Nico could be together. He even drew a picture of a rose on it and signed the whole thing as Kevin. Look, I get that it's easy to get swept away in Gigi's messages of extreme individualism and his detest of conformity. But I think it was important to remember that the man was really a monster. He routinely slept with underage girls, which, by the way, is rape. He abandoned his daughter, and what he did to some folks at his shows went well beyond even the most flexible definitions of consent. So, should you listen to GG Allin's music? Sure. Cherry pick some bits and pieces? I guess, maybe, but be careful. But whatever you do, don't be like GG Allin. We already had one of those, and it was too much for this world. And I guess at the end of the day, it might have been nice if we got to know Kevin a little bit more. GG Allin's mother, Arleta, passed away last year in 2019. Whew. I know this one was a bit of a heavy one, but one last fun fact. I'll miss you guys. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Oh, there goes that music again. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Band Media Podcast. Email us at bandmediapodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ronnie Ursenbach. And please like, comment, subscribe. And if you donate blood, come join our Band Media Podcast team on the Red Cross app. And if you don't donate blood, then think about starting and then do the thing I just said. Well, that's enough of my rambling for now, but keep being wonderful, dear listeners. Adios.